Let's start with a roll call. Alderwoman Finlayson,
Present.
Alderwoman O'Neill.
Present.
Excellent. Next up, we have the approval of the agenda. I believe we are looking to add supplemental appropriation 2525 to that agenda. Do I see a motion to approve the agenda with supplemental appropriation 2525 added?
I don't necessarily.
May I ask, do we have it attached? What is 2025?
It's in your email because I just received the signed copy, but we're adding it. So I sent it to you all's email, and so did Jay.
Can you hit the buttons on all those mics?
And
Okay.
to answer your question, it deals with health testing for cancer screening testing for our firefighters, and we need to have the grant signed by, I think, January 16th. So it's a urgent matter.
So, Mr. Chair, I'll make a recommendation to approve the agenda as amended.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Wonderful. Thank you, everybody. I am pulling up our now amended agenda and jump into that in just one moment.
For that 510.
I apologize, folks. I am on my laptop. I'm used to having my iPad in front of us when we're in person. But like I said, I've been responding to a bunch of snow things this morning. Can one of you two remind me what is next on our agenda?
Mr. Chair, I'll move approval of the minutes from the December 11th meeting, as well as the minutes from the December 18th meeting.
Thank you
Second.
very much, Alderwoman Finlayson. All those in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
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 Aye. Excellent. All right, now I have our agenda in front of us. Apologies, folks.
So, do you have your agenda, Mr. Chair?
Yes. So
Okay.
we'll start with that supplemental appropriation 2525. And would Chief Remele like to talk about this, or somebody else from the department?
Sure, I could start. Thank you all for adding it to the agenda. As you know, sometimes with grants, we get short turnarounds. Which is interesting with this grant is that January has been designated Firefighter Cancer Awareness Month by the International Association of Firefighters and the National Firefighters Support Foundation for Cancer. The council knows that cancer has been one of my concerns for some time. We're seeing a very large increase of cancer cases in the fire service. A lot of that has to do with the materials that are burned during a fire and the materials that we run into. If you recall that budget or so ago, even our turnout gear had some cancerous materials in it, some PFAS materials, and you were able to at least give us some supplemental funds to get us to state-of-the-art turnout gear that we have today. It still has some of those materials in it, but it is encapsulated, and it's the safest stuff that was out there at the time. But with that, cancer continues to be a concern. I think in 2023, the leading cause of firefighter deaths had moved to cancer-related issues, and we have concerns. We actually have 3 members of our department that have been dealing with cancer, and they continue to do that. But we, throughout some time period, the councils have helped us improve that. We don't have a second set of turnout gear, but when we go to a fire scene, we're able to come back. We have extractors, thanks to your budgeting and allowing us that funding in the stations. And we have enough turnout gear that they can go and get a second set while theirs is being cleaned. So we've continued to work with that. And with our cancer prevention program, we wanted to do some testing that's not covered during our yearly testing with our yearly physicals. And actually, this was a partnership with our local 1926 International Association of Firefighters. The state, Governor Hogan at the time, had released some funds for cancer testing for firefighters. They finally released those funds just recently. We submitted for it, and Chief Lopez can tell you a little bit about what this is going to do. But this is a close to $40,000 grant that's coming from the state. We have very little supplemental to go with it. Anything that's not covered, we can cover within our budget with our current physicals, but it's a low amount. But Chief Lopez can let you know what it's going to do for us.
Morning. So as Chief O'Malley mentioned, the cancer has become nationwide the leading cause of line of duty deaths. That is from both the IAFF, the Firefighters Cancer Network, NIOSH, and the CDC. We did apply for the Maryland Professional Volunteer Firefighter Initiative Cancer Screening Technology Grant. We did receive the grant. The grant is for $39,975, and it's to cover 123 of our uniformed personnel. We do have 134 uniformed personnel. So as Chief O'Malley did mention, the overage of what the grant will provide, we can absolutely absorb within our annual Fire Department employee physicals account. The grant will allow us to do cancer screening through an innovative technology that has been offered across the country. It's a preventative screening, and it's a non-invasive ultrasound that looks for a variety of cancers. They specifically look to check individuals for 9 particular cancers: thyroid, liver, kidney, gallbladder, spleen, testicular for men, pelvic for women. They have detected not only cancers, but a number of other issues that have arisen, from blockages in the heart to other ailments that are seen in this screening process. So we look forward to the council's adoption of moving forward with this grant. It will afford this opportunity for our members to be screened for this cancer. And if people test positive, then they are urged to go to see a specialist, and the that will be covered under their insurance. So I'm happy to field any questions you may have.
So basically, it's the health and safety of our people are of top-notch importance to us. And this screening will allow us to try to identify things early on, because as most of you know, with anybody's health, if we can do something early on, the possibility of having a successful outcome is there. So that's what we're trying to do here. And these state funds will allow us to do this testing, and then we'll look at what we need to do in the future. But we appreciate the council's support for this.
Absolutely. Do I see him? Oh yeah, Alderwoman Finlayson, you got a question?
Yes, 2 questions. First of all, who gets the results of their testing, or is it just a personal thing? And are they encouraged to get further study or further testing after the initial testing is done?
Thank you very much for your question. So yes, when an individual participates in this, they will be contacted directly by the physician associated with the screening company to go over their individual results. If the results show either an anomaly or a positive for cancer or something else, they are then urged to seek follow-up care. That follow-up care would be with a particular specialist of that body system that they found the anomaly in, and it's on the individual to follow up on that. We don't mandate the follow-up. That's on the individual.
And my second question has to do with the women in the department. Is there equitable distribution? I know we've had a number of losses over the years. I don't recall any women, but I think I'm wrong on that. But anyway, is there an equal distribution, or are there different tests designed for women in mind?
Yeah, so in fact, of the 9 critical cancers that are looked for, 1 specific is to men, which is testicular, and 1 specific to women, which is pelvic.
Okay.
And we did have a female captain who is retired from the department that is a cancer survivor. So we have dealt with this.
I do remember her. Thank you, gentlemen.
Any questions, Alderman O'Neill?
No, I'm all set.
Seems like a real important one to me. So, do I see a motion to approve supplemental appropriation 2525?
I'll make a motion to give a favorable recommendation for SA 2525 to the council.
Second,
All those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Wonderful. Thanks so much for being here with us, folks, and explaining just how important this is.
Thanks for the support. We appreciate it.
All right. We do have up next our changes to executive pay ranges, but I might seek unanimous consent to actually consider our annual meeting and tourism industry reception fee waiver first, given that I think it will take a little less time than our changes to executive pay ranges. Do I see any objections to that reordering?
No
No?
objection.
Seeing none, we're going to move on to R 5724, the annual meeting and tourism industry reception fee waiver. It's going to be happening on January 28th. I believe it's already got 4 co-sponsors, so seems likely that we'll get it done. But it has been introduced on first reader, and I'll just open the floor to if we have any city staff who want to explain this to us.
So I'll jump in and hope you can as well. So this is a meeting that happens each year. It's one that we have waived fees for before. Depending upon how you guys feel, we will have waived this now a couple of times. Whether that's something you would want us to just include in the automatic one every year, or whether you want to really confine that to specific city sponsored events and continue to have this come up as it comes up. Hope you can speak to what this is probably better than I can.
Hi, Hope Stewart, SMBE liaison in the Economic Development Office, and I am also a member of the board of directors for Visit Annapolis and Anne Arundel County. This event is their annual event, so it's for all of their stakeholders, partners, anybody that they want to invite to kind of spread the word on what they've accomplished this year. It's a really large event. It's very successful. And one of I think the greatest things about this event is that they set it up in the Ellipse. I don't know if any of you all have been there yet. It's the big parking lot behind the visitor center. And I feel like it's a really great way to showcase how this space can be used for events, not just for the visitor center, but for other people who might want to use it as an event space. So that's why it's nice to waive the fee for this event for the visitor center.
Thanks for the explanation, Hope. Do I see any questions from either of my colleagues about this?
I would like to ask Kaylin or Ms. Jackson to add me as a sponsor, please.
Seeing no further discussion, is there a motion to approve R 5724?
Mr. Chair, I'll move a favorable recommendation for R 5724.
Alderwoman O'Neill, do you have an interest in seconding this?
Oh, I did. Sorry. I keep getting a notice that my internet is unstable. So yes, I seconded.
Thank you very much. All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Excellent. All right, moving on to our meet here, R 5324. Third time's the charm perhaps on this, or perhaps not. This is the changes to the executive pay ranges. I think we can pick up where we left off on this, and as I remember, we had quite a few questions still to go. But I'll open the floor maybe to Director or to Ms. Hopkins if there's anything since our most recent Finance Committee meeting that you think we need to be updated on.
Sorry, I'm unmuted, but for some reason my camera won't come on. Vicky?
Vicky, you're
Vicky is
muted.
muted.
If there's anything in particular you wanted to say, that's fine. Otherwise, I'll jump in. So I'm aware that there are there's some additional information that has been requested. I know that Alderman Arnett had asked about a total compensation package. There were some other things that he was clearly interested in. He was going to put together a list, which I don't have yet. So I was going to be reaching out to him to get that final list of items. But I'm not aware of any outstanding requests from this committee, aside from the things we've already provided. But if you do have other questions, Tricia and I are happy to answer them.
Can I?
Oh, yes. I'm sorry. I didn't see your hand go up. Yeah. I'm not sure which one he was first. I will go with Alderwoman Finlayson as our senior member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure whether this question was answered, but I'm going to ask it again. On page 2 of the staff report, where under introducing an executive pay scale and adjusting the exempt list, my question and concern is about separating the the assistant city manager into 2 different roles, operations and administration. And I'm not clear on how that would work. We have one position, our assistant city manager, but there are 2 roles or 2 lists of responsibilities. So is the interest in creating a second city manager? Or how is that, or is it one person with 2 sets of responsibilities when the city manager has all of the responsibilities? How does that work?
The title, so the consultants had recommended a title change for the assistant city manager for my position, to essentially make it more the same way that the deputy city manager for resilience and sustainability, that title helps describe the scope of that job. They had recommended a title change for the assistant city manager to likewise make it more specific in some sense. I think that in the they did not recommend changes to there's not a second position, it's still just one, and did not make recommended changes to the job description. It really is just a title change. And so in terms of council's comfort with that, I mean, I think you can be guided by your comfort level. I'm not sure that that has a particularly material effect on the scope of the job.
Well, I guess I can speak to when we created the city manager's position and then when we created the assistant city manager. And if it's just semantics, it's not needed. But very clearly, the assistant city manager and the deputy city manager for resilience are not comparable. And that's kind of what I think I just heard you say, that the consultants made that assumption, but that was not the intent of the council. So anything that would divide, even in semantics, the role of the assistant city manager would be problematic if we only have one person. You know, if, like I said, if the intent is to create a second person, one for admin, one for operations, that's a different story. Then I'm not clear, and I see, Ms. Buckland, you're shaking your head no. So I'm not clear on why we would divide it if that's not the intent. So for that reason, I'm not going to support this unless it's removed.
Can I ask a question about that? Because I'm unclear, Alderwoman Finlayson. I thought it wasn't being divided. It was that the consultant suggested it be assistant city manager of operations, but the city would rather it be assistant city manager of administration. Am I not reading that correctly?
Well, either way, we have two different content areas. We have either it's administration or it's operations. Whether it's the consultant's view to change it to, what was the consultant suggested?
Operations.
Operation.
I had suggested operations.
Right, and then the staff suggesting that it's admin. Either way, there are two different responsibilities.
Trisha, can you, there you go, thank you.
Either way, I think it should be clear that the role is encompassing of both operations and admin. Did that answer your question, Alderwoman?
So are you suggesting that it just remain assistant city manager without an extended title?
Yes.
Okay, that was my confusion.
Do you mind if I comment on that? Oh boy, that's not good.
I think we had two Director Hopkins and they were echoing, but I saw the one get removed, so we might.
All right, now I can talk. I don't know why I'm in there twice, but that's okay. From a classification standpoint, you know, we have talked extensively about the ability to put working titles on positions. And so if we are recruiting for something that's more directed to administration over operations or some other combination of skill sets, we would have the ability to do so. I mean, if we're forecasting and looking at this in terms of where we would go in the future, you know, if there's a new administration, if a new city manager comes in and has other ideas about the focus of the position, having a more generic title would work just fine. I don't think, from my point of view, this does anything to hamper us now or in the future, and that if in fact the focus needs to be on administration rather than operations or some other description there, I still think it's workable and it's something that wouldn't be difficult to adjust to.
And just speaking for myself, I have no preferences. So it doesn't make any difference to me either way.
So we can just say it, assistant city manager, queen of all operations and administration.
Well, no, we would have some problem with that.
Just don't put it in the law.
I'm just teasing.
I have lived free and will die so. We're not big on kings and queens around here. So my two biggest issues that I keep coming back to on this are, one, that we're setting the city manager's pay range without getting the input from the review commission that is charter mandated to provide us the recommendation on the city manager's pay range. So I just have a hard time with even, and in general, I like the idea of being able to do things in parallel rather than in series, but it feels like we're violating the city charter if we go and set the city manager's pay range before we get the recommendations that we're required to get. So I have a problem with that. And then my other big concern is that, as I've said a couple of times now, I don't love the idea of having all of our department heads be in the same salary band. And we've all gone over this and acknowledged that realistically, they're not going to be paid the same salaries on average. But so then to me, it seems as though we should have different salary bands then. So I would love I'd love to hear my colleagues' thoughts on that. And if there are suggestions from any of our staff on how we can address that, or perhaps why you think it's a really bad idea to address that, I'd love to hear that as well.
Well, if
Alderwoman
I might,
Finlayson?
yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. We deliberately put all directors on the same scale, some 10 or 15 years ago, because there was a lack of parity, especially as it related to females holding director positions. That doesn't mean they get paid the same, and Ms. Hopkins will speak to this, but it does tell you what the range is. When they are interviewed for these director positions, there's a level of negotiations that takes place based upon the experiences and the tenure that the candidate may bring. And so there was a very legitimate reason, and we studied this long and hard before we put everyone at a same, in essence, starting point. So, and I still strongly believe that that was a good approach. But that was the inception behind it. But by no means do all of our directors make the same amount of money.
Right. And we're all, I think, clear on that. And so my argument is, if we all agree that they're not going to make the same, why would we put them all in the same band? And two other thoughts to directly address what you just said. One being, previously, we did not include police and fire chiefs in that because we recognize that those are pretty different markets. And now the proposal is to do that. So I think that's one reason.
They were in it originally also. Everyone was.
Right. I guess what I'm saying is, beforehand, we had different scales for our police and fire chief, and now we're putting them at the same level as all our other directors, even though our police chief manages, I think last I looked, 26% of our city budget. So that doesn't seem equitable to me. Secondly, I think by having these really wide bands in which we give more power at the negotiating table, or have more sort of wiggle room at the negotiating table, what I've read of research is that is one of the biggest ways that women candidates get disadvantaged. And I've done some significant research into the labor economics of this, that accounts for a portion of our gender pay gap as a country. I mean, I'm not talking about the city of Annapolis. So having those really wide bands, to me, does not seem like a solution to make us more equitable. And in fact, I worry it could be less equitable. But I see a thought from Ms. Hopkins. Do you want to jump in?
Yeah, there's a couple of factors that have influenced the difference in pay for fire and police. And when you sit down at the negotiating table, you have the impact of salaries for those particular groups coming into play. We have carried forward through the entire scale decisions about, if, say, we've negotiated with police, for example, we a couple of years ago went through this pretty significantly, and that it was a competitive pay rates around our comparators had jumped considerably. And so we carried that scale change all the way through to the chief of police. And so when you have those kinds of factors, and you have a separate fire, police, and a general scale, that's how you get some of those differences. This is coming back into probably the original intent of council back when, and it's also reflective of some other jurisdictions that are in the comparator groups that have consistent pay rates across their leadership, pay ranges. And I also want to describe that there's a difference between pay ranges and pay affected by pay ranges and pay that's affected by pay grades. And so we kind of mix that up here in the city a bit because people look at their pay. It's just their pay. And so I'm trying to explain before the impact of the study on our civil service positions. You may have a situation where people aren't paid appropriately in the market, but the adjustment may be to the range of pay, not to the pay grades specifically attached to the title. And so it's true that we have directors that are not paid all exactly the same here. Some of that's a function of what skills and talents they brought and what that negotiated pay rate was. But in every case, that comes back before the council for prior approval or for final approval of the selection, and includes the approval of the pay. So when we converted to this new scale, we're obviously suggesting that our leadership here should be on an open range because that's consistent with what's out there in the wider world. We don't need steps to come in and negotiate a particular pay step with somebody. But in that conversion, we are going to hold true to what was said before, which is we're not going to be bringing people in the higher end of that range and be out of kilter with our other leadership members. And so by function of that, you automatically have your kind of your upper thresholds around what you would bring somebody in to replace any of the executive leadership, so that you're not just adopting that full range of the scale. Your pay philosophy is consistent with what are we paying other members of the executive leadership group here? What should be our upper threshold on that based on ensuring that we have some reasonable equity and consideration of what people are already making.
I think I hear what you're saying. I'm not sure it changes my view on it, but thank you. Is there more discussion from Alderman O'Neill or Alderwoman Finlayson? No? I'll just say I am still not supportive of this legislation as it stands. I would like to see us have some more specificity in how department directors are getting paid. I think we all agree that they're going to get paid differently. And my take is if we all agree they're going to get paid differently on average, then it makes sense to have that spelled out in our city code rather than leaving it to the discretion of management. I think that provides the council with the appropriate oversight that we want to see. Could we, yeah, Alderman Finlayson, you have something you want to say on that?
I was going to ask what your pleasure is. Would you like to postpone action on this legislation to give us time to get additional information? Would you like to simply take no position on this? Would you like to oppose it? What is your flavor?
Yeah, well, I think I'd like to talk a little bit more about the point about the city manager, but in regards to the other issue that I brought up, I would like to see the director of HR and the assistant city manager put together an option to have sub bands within our E5 pay range that could be tied to most likely, I think, the budget, if they could maybe come up with a proposal for those sub bands within the E5 pay range that are tied to the budget of each one of those directors. that we could then consider. Yes, Ms. Hopkins.
So thank you for that. That's very helpful in terms of what you'd like to see. I have information I can discuss with Assistant City Manager Buckland ahead of time, and I think we could provide you with to answer those concerns. The other thing I wanted to say, which I didn't really address before, was about having the city managers pay in here when there's the authority of the Salary Review Commission to do that work. I am the support to the Salary Review Commission, and so my full intention was to spend time with them to provide this level of information, to provide the detail that was gathered by the consultants around the city manager's pay. So, because the main objective here is to put us in better stead with our comparators, right? And so when you have your city manager being held to a pay rate that's going to be outstripped by what's provided to others that are under the city manager's direct authority, it just doesn't look right. So part of the goal was to not get caught up in situations that prevented that from being the reasonable outcome, and that with the Salary Review Commission coming in as an independent body to look at that, you don't always get the benefit of that annual review and in comparison to pay rates related to city manager, whoever. Those individuals either negotiate the pay rate and it's nothing, said in ordinance or in their code or their prevailing law. And it is simply a matter of what is the negotiated package with that individual. And that's information I've provided in the past to the Salary Review Commission. We've kind of gotten through this over the years that I've been here, more into a very conservative and traditional way of looking at pay for both council, mayor, and city manager. And so it makes sense to see if there is something that puts us more in alignment with other organizations.
Thank you. Do either of my colleagues have anything they would like to raise? No. Can I sort of ask the two of you for your sense of where you fall on this legislation at this point? Are you leaning supportive, needing some amendments, or leaning towards opposing it? Yeah, Alderwoman O'Neill.
Thank you. I'm looking for my hand waving button. So I'd had an opportunity to talk with Assistant Vicky and with Ms. Hopkins last week. I sat down and just asked a lot of questions. I will be honest, most of my questions were about the other pay plan and the career ladders and the titles and things like that. My sense is my biggest frustration, and they know this because we talked about it, is the idea that we have, directors that have worked for the city for multiple years, and the idea that we're also bringing on directors that are making what those directors that have been with the city for 5+ years, they're making the same thing. That's really hard to swallow. And I understand the economics of, we're in a different place now than we were 5 years ago, as far as economics and hiring of individuals and things like that. By having the single executive pay scale, I do think that helps a little bit in that respect, as opposed to, having a director that's been with us, 6, 7, 8 years, and then a brand new director that the only way to fill that position is to bring them on, at a higher rate. Taking a look at our costs, if if Director A, who's been here for 7 or 8 years, leaves because they can get what Director B, who is just coming in, gets in a new place. What's the cost to the city for that? How do we retain people that have been with us for a long time? How do we, weigh those two things? Bringing on good talent that hopefully will remain with us for a long time versus keeping our talent that we have and keeping them happy. I'm saying all that just to kind of let you know where my mind has been thinking along the lines of these. I'm prone to, as long as our finances work, as long as our projections for future budgeting, future meaning this year, next year, 5 years from now, that we can maintain that and not be looking at where we were, I believe Alderman Finlayson can verify, 10 years ago, where we stripped departments down in order to balance our budgets. We moved some things around, we shifted things. We don't want to be in that position. We don't want to hire this awesome talent and then in 3 years not being able to sustain those pay levels. But at the same time, as I also talked with the two directors last week, in many cases, if we have those individuals in place, the city is actually realizing better revenue because we have those people in place that are doing the jobs, that are working to get us, also qualified talents on the other levels in their departments. So it is a huge undertaking for us to be looking at a pay scale that levels the playing field for and elevates the playing field for all of our directors. And I think that what we really need to be paying attention to, and I think that Ms. Hopkins can provide this as she has suggested, is the comparisons. What we're looking at, when we have a job applicant, we're not just looking at somebody who's applying to Anne Arundel County and to the city of Annapolis. We're looking at somebody that's applying to Baltimore, Baltimore City, Howard County, Montgomery County in many cases. I know that Director Simmons said that he had an employee who currently lives in Montgomery County and trying to see if that person will actually relocate here. Because, our requirement is that if you work for a certain department, you have to be able to be here within a certain amount of time. And, how can you live on the other side of Baltimore or, in Rockville and expect to be here in 20 minutes or 30 minutes time frame? So I think that there's a lot to play, and I understand, Alderman Hunley, your hesitation and concern about that. And I think that opening this dialogue and talking with both with our directors and with our admin staff, administrators, is it sustainable? And that's really how my vote is going to go. And I apologize for the rambling because I'm trying to read from my notes and talk at the same time. So that's where our discussion really needs to be. Like, what is the sustainability of this current plan structure? And I believe that our finance director can help answer that. Our budget manager can help answer that, possibly. That's going to end my rant.
No, I appreciate you kind of talking through it because that's how I get through a lot of these things as well. And I had some of the same questions when I most recently spoke with our assistant city manager. But yeah, I think it comes down to, can we afford it in a lot of ways? And I'd love to get the input on that from the folks who know it best, our finance director and our budget manager.
Was that a direct question to one of the two?
Either of the two.
Well, I'm not sure what your question is.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. Can somebody articulate the question about the finances?
Well, so I'll put it this way. Maybe this was not exactly how Alderwoman O'Neill was framing it, and please jump in if you feel like I'm not fully capturing what you're thinking. But one of the issues that I have with this from the beginning is that the fiscal impact note to me doesn't seem appropriate because it says there is no fiscal impact because the salaries are all currently within the E scale. But I think the expectation is that salaries will continue to change, and in general, they're on the lower end of the new scale.
So,
And so
but I will,
what I
go
yeah,
ahead.
if I could just finish formulating,
Yep.
what I would like to understand is frankly like a more concrete picture of that fiscal impact, because what do we really project will be the difference between if we pass this legislation, how much will we be paying these folks over the next 5 years? And if we do not pass this legislation, if it just entirely dies, what will we be paying those folks over the next, let's say, 5 years? What's the delta there?
Okay, so the fiscal impact note deals with the action of passing this scale doesn't have any impact because nobody's salary is going to change.
Right.
So then if you're looking towards the future, it all ties to during the budget process each year, what does management decide we can afford to pay in increases to these individuals, and or because it's a scale, I don't know what our pay rules are going to be surrounding that scale. With our other groups, as you know, it's just one step up, which for right now, one step up is 3 or 4%, depending on which step you're at in the scale. This gives a little bit more flexibility, and it would be an upper level management decision, but would also be limited by how much funding there is in the budget. So I mean, I won't be the one, finance would not be the one deciding that, except to tell you what the parameters are on the funding levels. I mean, it would be, typically everybody's gotten the same percentage increases every year, but I don't know if that's what leadership would decide or not. If there's some would be lower, some would be higher, somebody needs an adjustment, etc. But I can't tell you what we're going to be paying people in 4 years because that is a management's decision when you have a pay scale that's deals in ranges.
I will add to that though, that one of the things that I think it's easy to forget is that the city has traditionally had COLAs. And so that upper range on the current scale and the FY24 scale, that's true, the FY that has previously been true, that upper number has changed fairly regularly, right? So I think sometimes it's easy to look at that as though that were a static number, and that actually has not been true. Jody, is that fair to phrase it that way?
Yes, and that kind of goes along with what I was saying is in the past, it's all been the directors were getting the same increases as the rest of the employees because of the way it was set up with it, either a COLA or just a one step up. If somebody had movement in the scale, they'd go one step up the scale, and then they get any COLA that was impacted on the scale. But like I said, yeah, I mean, the difference is that this is a range, and we are what we give to the directors in increases will be determined by the city manager and or the funding under the restrictions of the funding increases, and that it's not necessarily a 3 or 4% increase unless that's how we write it into our pay rules or our pay decisions that we're doing from a management perspective.
It ends up being more of a budgetary decision, yes.
Yeah. And so as we approach each of these years in the budget process, and you have a range, if there are increases being offered to department directors, that's a budgetary decision. If there's no budget for it, then that's something that council has the ultimate decision making on as far as how much funds will be allotted for salaries. But again, you don't want your leaders to be making get out of pace with the people that are reporting to them. You want to keep them at least up to pace with them.
Yes, Alderwoman Finlayson.
I'm not clear on why we cannot get a fiscal impact statement that gives us the projections. Because what I'm hearing Ms. Dickinson say is the fiscal impact note tells us today, if we pass this legislation, the fiscal impact that it will have. We need to know, if we were to pass this, what would, and I use this very bad metaphor, what would the worst case scenario be? If everybody that is in question was on the highest end, what would that cost the city? I think that's what we need to know. Isn't there a way to give us that information so we can truly decide whether we are planning for the future? You know, in the past, and one item I want to address, we did not change the pay scale because we had fiscal restrictions. The change in departments came about totally as a political move when we lost 6 of our directors, and those losses were directly politically motivated. Okay? Had nothing to do with 08 and 09 and the downfall of the economy. So I just wanted to be clear that that was not quite the scenario. But back to my original point, I think I would like to see, and I think the chairman would like to also see, what this would cost us if everybody got to the highest point in their range. And I agree, you know, it's not easy because COLAs and steps, longevity steps, were easy to calculate. And now we don't have those things, or we won't. So how do we calculate future cost for us?
So if you're gonna, go ahead, Vicki, you go first.
Yeah, let me jump in real quick. So 2 things. One, Jody earlier had done a calculation comparing when we proposed the new pay scales for FY25, had done a comparison of what kind of our traditional increases had been over the years compared with where we projected under the new pay scales. And they are either at or below what we've seen over the last couple of years. The thing to remember about the executive scale in particular, though, is that it has, as constructed, and given what those positions are, council has considerably more control over those positions and their salaries than they do over any other positions, from 2 perspectives. One, you already are in the position of approving initial salaries. So there's an entry level, some approval and oversight that council is able to exercise when someone is hired. In addition, the feature of the open scale is that it ends up being those decisions. It's not an automatic, the way the steps are, you know, if it's going from here to here, it's 4%. If it's here to here, it's 3%, right? And you don't have options about that. That's not true with the open range. You end up with the option to choose something else depending upon what the fiscal conditions are. And so part of the reason it's a little bit hard to estimate future impact is because you actually have much more control over those costs than you do for any other positions in the city. Trisha and Jody, I want to give you a chance to fact check what I just said to make sure that is fair and accurate.
And yes, that kind of echoes what I was saying is you would have the control over the funding and your scenario of what's the maximum impact. If some city manager came in and said, I want to pay all my directors top of the new scale. I think they're all fabulous. Let's bump them all up to the top. And that is their prerogative, except for that the council has to approve the funding for that decision in the annual budget process. And if you didn't agree, you would say, no, department budgets are going to be cut by this amount because we don't agree with that decision. So you have control to not provide the funding, even if the city manager wanted to pay people those increased amounts. So I can give you estimates over any assumptions. You have to give me the assumptions because in these cases, we don't know what the future holds for those positions because we don't know what the increases will be. But if I can give you that number, but that would only happen if the council went along with those funding increases. You would be a partner in that decision.
I would just like to add one other piece to that. With the construction of the scale being an open range, you have to affirmatively set what is a cost of living adjustment and what is we'll say a merit amount, an adjustment for performance. And those two things in an open range unlike a step system, need to be affirmatively set out in the funding sources in the budget process. That I'm familiar with that, having worked for the county government, Anne Arundel County government, and having open ranges for a number of their scales. We actually, once upon a time, had open ranges for all positions, going from a step system. And that's the manner in which it needs to be handled through a budget process, which is to say this year, the merit amount for those in open ranges will be X. That's one methodology of approaching it.
I'm not sure that necessarily answered your question. I wanted to check in on that.
I think if we could, like, what I'm imagining here is sort of a chart that shows, and I get you would need some assumptions for this. So there's sort of a couple different levels of assumptions, right? I'm imagining almost sort of like, maybe this is a weird analogy, but you see charts of, well, let's go with this is better. Charts of economic growth. And you can imagine, or of carbon emissions, right? And you see it of under 3 different scenarios. Under a worst case scenario, here's what we expect to be over the next 5 years. Under a typical scenario, and then you have a comparison. So the status quo, as it were. So I think having something like that can show us over the next 5 years. And I keep using 5 years because I think that's the time frame that the assistant city manager and I discussed. But I realize it's actually more like maybe 4 years or maybe 6 years. To understand what our fiscal impact of this would be better. I just, among other reasons for concern, I don't feel like I have a good enough sense of what this will actually cost. So my request is some kind of a couple different scenarios, understanding that may be different assumptions. It may be, it may be different assumptions, as we were just saying. You know, what if we have a city manager who's profligate? What if we have a some kind of recession? Having those different scenarios and what you all think is most likely and some of the ones that are less likely but still possible would be helpful for us to better evaluate what this might cost. Okay. So just to to recap, I think I'm at the couple of things I would like to see for our next consideration of this is those projections on what it might cost, a potential amendment that we can talk about for breaking those department directors into sub pay scales. And I'm suggesting that be based on budget, but I'd be open to other suggestions. And I guess I'm still not totally clear on the situation with the city manager and the salary review commission, but I also don't have a clear ask on that either. Is there anything either of my colleagues would like to see to be better informed about this and hopefully be able to move forward in some direction? Let's say move in some direction for our next meeting. Yeah, Alderwoman.
I will say I would like to see those projections as you've outlined. For me, I do want to see a 5-year plan. If everybody on this pay scale is getting their regular COLA over the past 3 years, we've traditionally seen a 3 to 4% increase, cost of living increase. I believe was the last couple of budgets have been that. And then if a merit increase and where we are in that, what the end result is, what our total employee payout for this year is versus next year and the following year, even if it only goes out for 3 years, so that we can see a trend and see, how it stacks up against our revenue. So utilizing those exact numbers, like what we've seen in what's the trend for the last 3 years? Has it traditionally been, the COLA been 3 to 4%? I see some heads nodding. And if there's been a fairly standard merit increase, we're going from steps to, open-ended, but what the average of those have been so that we can see that projection. Does that make sense, Budget Manager Trudeau?
Yes, ma'am. COLA last
Thank
year
you.
was 2.5%.
Okay. Thank you.
I think that's a good way of articulating more clearly what I was trying to get at. Thank you, Alderwoman Onion. Alderwoman Finlayson, you got anything else you want to add?
No, I think you've covered my interest. So thank you.
So I think we are going to once again look to postpone this to our next meeting. I think we do have, we're maybe getting a little bit closer on it. We've got some action items. Do I see a motion to postpone this to the next meeting?
I'll make a recommendation that
I'll make a motion to
R5324
I'll
until the
take
next
that
meeting.
I'll take that as a motion and second on the motion. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Beautiful. The last item on our agenda is our finance director update. I noticed we got that in writing today. Thank you very much, Director Dickinson. But anything else that you want to highlight for us out of that?
No, I added a sentence on there about the debt. I mean, typically this time of year, we've had a debt issue, but we've got additional proceeds that we haven't used yet from the previous issue, and we have to get through those before we even consider issuing more bonds for our projects. So we're not close there, and it'll probably be at least another few months, maybe another year before we are ready to issue any new bonds. And then just, the filling of the vacancies, assistant finance director, I mentioned on there that, again, I've interviewed some candidates and we haven't chosen a replacement yet. And now we're far enough along with the finance director process that we may pause the assistant director to see who comes in and what they want to do with that assistant position. So I don't know if the assistant city manager wants to add to that at all.
Yeah, that is moving forward. were able to do, the city manager was able to do second round interviews. So that, that is continuing to move forward. And we're pretty happy about that, given that Jody's retirement is looming closer.
It's sad we all are about it. Is there anything else for the good of the order? So Alderwoman O'Neill come off mute.
Nope.
Nope.
I was just
Okay.
going to vote for adjournment.
You're ahead of the game. All right. Do I see a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Motion to adjourn.
All right.
Okay.
All those in favor of adjourning at 12:10 p.m. on January 8th, 2025, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much to all our city staff. I know this is a kind of a contentious issue we've been grappling with for a little while, and I'm glad we're moving on it, it feels like. Have a great rest of your day, everybody.
Thank you.
you.
Hi.